Please the débat. The honourable member for Timmins, James Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As always, it is a great honour to stand in this House, given the honour to represent the people of Timmins, James Bay, who put their trust in me. And I want to thank my colleague from Guelph tonight for his support for our motion, my motion 456, but for the New Democratic Party's push to establish a national palliative care strategy. This is an issue that transcends partisanship because it touches each one of us, and it touches us in our most personal and sacred space, which is the moment between life and death and a moment when a family deals with the loss of a loved one. I would be remiss if I did not thank the excellent work of our parliamentarians of all political parties in this House who have worked on the issue of palliative care. The language of this motion comes from the work of the all-party committee with my colleague from Kitchener-Conestoga, the colleague from Guelph, and the colleague for Windsor-Tecumseh, who's in the chair. He'll probably give me a few extra minutes of speaking. No. And I gave him a shout-out. But anyways, I'm in a forgiving mood tonight, Mr. Speaker. So the need to get, and my colleague from Guelph talks about a conversation. I think that this is what a motion is. A motion is a statement of principle and a statement of intent by the Parliament of Canada, and it can be a very profound moment when parliamentarians are asked to say what it is that we need to move forward as a country. Certainly we recognize in this federal House that the delivery of health services in this country are better served at the provincial level. We understand the jurisdictional divisions in the country, and they make sense because as we move health care closer to the ground level, we can certainly see more proactive and better results. But in terms of palliative care, we're faced with a problem because there is a patchwork response right now. All too often in the issue of palliative care, we see it as considered some form of charity or it's volunteer work, as opposed to an essential fundamental principle in terms of where we need to have health care in the 21st century, particularly as we deal with an aging population. The issue, as my colleague from Vancouver East has pointed again and again, the future of health care will be moving more and more out of the hospitals and into the need to have an understanding of ongoing care to ensure that every Canadian has the quality of life they need, particularly when they're faced with a traumatic illness. So the mission statement that we are being asked upon as all parliamentarians here is to say, in this House, this federal House, we have a role to play in talking about what palliative care should look like. It's not to dictate how it will be delivered, but we can play an essential role, a powerful role as a federal government in saying there are models that work. We see in various parts of the country where the delivery of palliative services are done in an integrated fashion. And where the services are integrated, families are able to receive the care and the support that they want and they need. But where the services are not integrated, this money is still being spent. In fact, I would argue, and medical doctors would agree, that we're spending more money. And yet, people are still falling through the cracks. So the palliative solution is the common sense solution staring politicians in the face. They just need to say, at this time, we need a political will to talk about end-of-life care. I would like to say that in terms of when you mention palliative to Canadians, they suddenly think, oh God, why are you talking about death? It will do us well, I think, to look at some of the fundamental definitions, for example, used by the Canadian Medical Association. When they talk about palliative care, the word death is not there. It's about life. It's an approach that improves the quality of life of patients and their families facing the problems associated with life-threatening illness through the prevention and relief of suffering by means of early identification, assessment and treatment of pain, and other symptoms, physical, psychosocial, and spiritual. I'd also point out the definition of dying with dignity, which has been a term that you see often in the media. The Canadian Medical Association says that dying with dignity indicates a death that occurs within the broad parameters set forth by the patient with respect of how they wish to be cared for. It is not synonymous with euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide. And I think that's a very powerful statement that the Canadian Medical Association has brought forward for us. I want to speak a little bit about the amendment that was brought forward by my colleague from Vancouver East, who has been so committed to the issue of ongoing care and has done much more work on these issues of palliative care than I have done over the years. And in her amending language to this to clarify that in the opinion of the House, the government should establish a pan-Canadian palliative and end-of-life care strategy by working with the provinces and territories on a flexible, integrated model of palliative care that A, takes into account the geographic, regional and cultural diversity of urban and rural Canada, as well as Canada's First Nation, Inuit and Métis peoples. B, respects the cultural, spiritual and familial needs of all Canadians. And C, has the goal of 1, ensuring all Canadians have access to high-quality, home-based and hospice palliative end-of-life care. 2, providing more support for caregivers. 3, improving the quality and consistency of home and hospice palliative end-of-life care in Canada. And 4, encouraging Canadians to discuss and plan for the end-of-life care. And I'd like to tonight just focus in for a second on the importance that we recognize in the House the cultural, spiritual and familial needs of families, because this is not just about the individual. The death of a loved one, their passage through to that other place, is one of the defining moments in the life of a family. And when there is palliative care, when there is support, it can be a very transformative moment. And when the support is not there, it can be a moment of crisis that families sometimes never recover from. I want to say that this motion, as I said at the beginning, is not about the partisanship in this House. And this has been a very bitter and toxic Parliament. But we need to, all of us, say, we're going to put some of our own political agenda aside. I know some of my colleagues on the Conservative Party are nervous by the word strategy. The strategy is the language that came from the all-party committee, and I certainly believe the notion of strategy is important. Some of our Conservative colleagues would prefer to use the word framework. And I want to say that it doesn't matter to me if it's a strategy and/or framework. What matters is that we stand in this House and say that we will support this. So I'd like to try and find a way, if we can tonight, make an agreement that we can get the language that makes everyone comfortable so that we will all stand in this House, because no matter what happens with this motion, we have to show Canadians that we understand this. So, Mr. Speaker, the simplest way to do this, I would like to ask for unanimous consent for the following motion: that notwithstanding any standing order or usual practice of the House, the amendment to motion M456, standing in the name of Ms. Davies of Vancouver East, be deemed adopted, and that the main motion as amended be further amended by adding after the word strategy the words and/or framework. I bring forward that now, if we have.
Does the honourable member have the unanimous consent of the House to move the motion? There is no unanimous consent.